Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that changed borders, reshaped identities, and redefined a nation's destiny, the night Ukraine severed the ties to Crimea. This isn't just a moment in history. It's a turning point that continues to echo across politics, culture, and global security. To understand what happened, we have to go back in time, explore how the bond between Ukraine and Crimea formed, how it broke, and what that means for the world today. Crimea's story is deeply layered. For centuries, it's been a crossroads of empires, from the Ottoman rule to the Russian Empire, from the Soviet Union to independent Ukraine. Each era left its mark, shaping the peninsula's identity. In 1954, Crimea was transferred from the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Back then, it was seen as an administrative gesture meant to celebrate the 300th anniversary of a treaty linking Ukraine and Russia. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, that decision suddenly became crucial. Ukraine declared independence, and Crimea became an autonomous republic within Ukraine's borders. For years, Ukraine tried to balance between its historical ties with Russia and its growing aspiration to align with Europe. It was a delicate dance, and Crimea was at the center of it. The region was home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet, stationed in Sevastopol, making it strategically vital for Moscow. The majority of the peninsula's population identified as ethnically Russian, and Russian remained the dominant language. Still, Crimea remained under Ukrainian sovereignty, at least on paper. Then came 2014. What started as protests in Kiev against then? President Viktor Yanukovych's decision to abandon an agreement with the European Union turned into something far larger. The Euro-Maiden movement toppled Yanukovych, who fled to Russia. The new interim government in Kiev signaled a clear westward turn. To Moscow, this shift was alarming. Ukraine was slipping out of its orbit. In late February 2014, unidentified armed men, later confirmed to be Russian forces, began seizing control of key sites in Crimea. Government buildings, communication hubs, and military installations were taken over. The Crimean parliament was surrounded, and within days, a new pro-Russian leadership emerged. The Ukrainian flag was lowered in several cities, replaced by Russian symbols. On March 11, the Crimean parliament declared independence from Ukraine. 5 days later, a controversial referendum was held. The official results claimed that over 95% voted to join Russia, though the vote took place under military occupation and without international recognition. On March 18, 2014, Russia formally annexed Crimea. For many Ukrainians, that was the night the ties were truly severed. The connection that had bound Crimea to Ukraine legally, politically, and emotionally was cut. The shock was immediate and profound. Ukraine lost a significant portion of its territory, including its only warm water ports and access to vital resources. Crimea was not just symbolic. It was economically and strategically essential. It was home to tourism, agriculture, and industries that supported Ukraine's economy. Losing it wasn't just a geopolitical blow, it was personal. Families were divided, soldiers were forced to leave bases, and Ukrainian identity in the region was suddenly under threat. The Ukrainian government responded by severing logistical ties. One of the most symbolic moves came when Ukraine cut off the North Crimean Canal, the main water supply that flowed from the Dnipro River into the peninsula. That decision created severe water shortages, affecting agriculture and daily life in Crimea. It was a clear signal. Ukraine was refusing to legitimize the annexation and would not cooperate under occupation. Internationally, the reaction was swift. The United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution affirming Ukraine's territorial integrity and declaring the Crimean referendum invalid. The United States, the European Union, and other countries imposed sanctions on Russia. But despite global condemnation, Russia solidified its control, building new infrastructure like the massive Crimean Bridge to connect the peninsula to mainland Russia. For ordinary people, life changed overnight. Those who identified as Ukrainian or Crimean Tatar faced persecution, forced disappearances, and pressure to accept Russian citizenship. The Crimean Tatars, who had already endured deportation under Stalin, once again faced discrimination. Many fled to mainland Ukraine, leaving behind homes and communities. For those who supported Russia, the annexation felt like a return home. Moscow poured in investments, raised pensions, and promoted development projects. But over time, economic isolation and sanctions began to weigh heavily on the region. Prices rose, tourism declined, and many Crimeans found their opportunities limited. What seemed like a victory for some quickly revealed deeper costs. For Ukraine, losing Crimea reshaped its national identity. It became a unifying wound, a reminder of vulnerability and a motivation to strengthen independence. The loss forced Ukraine to accelerate its shift toward Europe and NATO. What had been a political debate before 2014 became a matter of survival. The annexation showed Ukrainians that neutrality was no longer an option. Politically, the separation of Crimea also fueled the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Soon after the annexation, pro-Russian separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk declared their own independence, leading to years of war in the Donbas region. The line between war and peace blurred, and the world began to realize that Crimea had been just the beginning. The phrase, "the night Ukraine severed the ties to Crimea," doesn't just describe a single event. It symbolizes the moment when Ukraine's post-Soviet balance collapsed. It was when Kiev realized that its sovereignty could no longer be taken for granted. That night represents the breaking point between two worlds, one looking westward toward Europe, and one anchored in Russia's sphere. In the years that followed, the division deepened. Crimea became one of the most militarized regions in Europe. Russian bases expanded, and missile systems were installed across the peninsula. The Black Sea turned into a strategic zone of tension, monitored closely by NATO and Ukraine. For the global community, Crimea became the flashpoint that reminded everyone how fragile peace could be. For Ukraine, severing the ties wasn't a choice, it was a painful necessity. The government had to accept that Crimea, at least for now, was beyond its control. But Kiev never stopped claiming it. Every official document, every map, every political statement from Ukraine still includes Crimea as part of its territory. The legal and emotional connection remains, even if the physical one has been cut. The story of Crimea also became a story of resilience. Ukraine adapted, reoriented its economy, strengthened its military, and sought deeper integration with the West. The loss of Crimea, while devastating, pushed the nation toward reforms that might not have happened otherwise. The annexation hardened Ukraine's sense of national unity. It taught the country that independence has a price, and that sovereignty must be defended constantly. Meanwhile, Russia faced its own consequences. The annexation triggered sanctions that strained its economy, isolated it diplomatically, and limited access to global markets. Yet, domestically, it became a rallying point for Russian nationalism. Crimea was portrayed as a triumph, a correction of history. The image of reclaiming lost territory boosted President Vladimir Putin's popularity, at least in the short term. Years later, As the full-scale war between Russia and Ukraine began in 2022, Crimea once again became central. The peninsula served as a launching ground for military operations against Ukraine. Russian troops moved north from Crimea, attacking southern cities like Kherson and Zaporizhia. The region's transformation from a tourist destination to a military fortress was complete. Yet, despite the darkness, Ukraine's connection to Crimea has never fully disappeared. Culturally and spiritually, many Ukrainians still see the peninsula as home. The memories of beaches, family roots, and shared history remain alive. Every anniversary of the annexation reignites debates about justice, sovereignty, and the future. When we talk about the night Ukraine severed its ties to Crimea, we're not only describing political events, we're also describing the emotional severance, the pain of watching a part of one's homeland fall away. It's about the silence that followed, the realization that the world had changed overnight. It's about the heartbreak of knowing that a place that once felt so close suddenly became unreachable. Still, the story isn't over. Ukraine continues to vow that Crimea will return. The phrase "Crimea is Ukraine" is more than a slogan, it's a declaration of identity, a promise to the future. The international community, for the most part, still recognizes Crimea as Ukrainian territory, and for millions of people displaced or affected, hope remains. The night the ties were severed is a reminder of how quickly power can shift and how fragile peace truly is. It shows that geography and politics are not static. They live, change, and evolve with human choices. It also reminds us that even when borders are redrawn, memory endures. In the end, Crimea stands as both a tragedy and a lesson. It's a tragedy because of the loss, the conflict, and the suffering it caused. But it's also a lesson about sovereignty, resilience, and the importance of defending what defines a nation. Ukraine's story did not end with the loss of Crimea. In many ways, it began anew. As the years go by, historians may debate the exact moment the ties were cut. Was it the night of the annexation, the day the canal closed, or the moment Ukrainian troops withdrew? But in truth, it was a culmination of years of tension, mistrust, and conflicting visions of the future. It was not one night, but 1,000 decisions leading to one irreversible break. Today, Crimea remains at the heart of one of the most consequential conflicts of our time. It stands as a symbol of loss, resistance, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty. The night Ukraine severed the ties to Crimea may have marked the end of one chapter, but it also began another, one of defiance, identity, and the unyielding belief in a nation's right to exist. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most pivotal moments in modern history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's continue to learn, question, and remember that every story like this carries lessons about courage, consequence, and the cost of freedom. See you in the next video.